Christmas of 1975 is not a very merry one for those aboard the Bearer D oil rig. As Still Wakes the Deep begins, the biggest unknown is who will win a festive game of darts. But after a routine drilling operation goes horribly wrong, who's going to emerge victorious at the Oki soon becomes the least of the crew's worries.
Guys, help me! Guys, don't let me die, please! I don't want to die! I don't want to die!
The game's original pitch was the thing on an oil rig, and in many ways, that's exactly what you get. Surrounded by turbulent waters and later a storm which engulfs the already crumbling structure, you quickly begin to feel just as isolated as RJ McCready did, cut off from your friends and, most importantly, your family back in Scotland, while later also being hunted by hideous creatures. That crippling sense of loneliness, the overwhelming desperation, is only felt so acutely though because of the wonderful job developer The Chinese Room does of making the characters you interact with feel alive in a way few games I've played have accomplished. Indeed, it's the standout part of what is often a mixed bag of brilliance and banality. During this 4 to 5 hour escapade, you step into the shoes of Cameron McCleary, or Kaz for short. A Glaswegian electrician and family man, Kaz not only left his wife Suze and his daughters to work at sea, but also to evade the law, who are looking for him back on the mainland after he was involved in a pub fight. His relatively mundane background might not make him sound like protagonist-worthy material, and it might also concern you to hear that the rest of the motley crew he interacts with are even less layered. But that's where a lot of Still Wakes the Deep's beauty comes from. As with any so-called walking simulator, you'll be digesting a significant amount of dialogue, and the conversations between characters never fail to be riveting thanks to how wonderfully each and every one of them is written and performed. It doesn't matter whether you're chatting to a deer, an imposing brute of a man whose room is adorned with nationalist propaganda.
You wouldn't know a day's graft if it slapped you in the face.
I'd like to see you try and do my job.
Or your best bud Roy, the cook.
You think it's the police?
Can't be surprised, Kaz. You heard from Suze?
She's talking about divorce.
Oh, I'm sorry, Kaz. She'll come around.
Not if I get to jail, she won't.
Well, maybe you could have considered that while you were battering Billy Chamberlain's head in.
Every single conversation between Kaz and his colleagues is precisely like one two normal people working a tough gig might have, and it remains that way right through to the end of the game, regardless of how much the stakes are raised. Alec Newman in particular deserves a huge amount of credit for his stunning performance as the game's hero. The script is a difficult one, full of Scottish slang, a spectacular amount of swearing, and considerable sadness, and irrespective of tone, not once did Kaz's remarks fail to hit the appropriate note. What a shame then that the story which sits above all those brilliant interactions never ends up forming a satisfying, cohesive whole. Two separate threads unfold as you explore, and while they both remain mostly compelling throughout, when thought of as a single entity, they form a shape just as mangled as any of the monsters you stumble upon. Half the tale consists of that which unfolds on the rig itself, as Kaz struggles to stay alive while all hell breaks loose around him. His ultimate goal, of course, is to escape, but he will have to do so by means of a mess of busy work, with anything and everything that could go wrong unravelling as soon as he finishes cleaning up whatever previous mess he was forced to contend with. It's all a little too convenient, with each new dilemma unfolding like clockwork, heralded by the sound of a ringing phone somewhere in the vicinity, and it robs Kaz of much of his agency.
Listen to me, McClary. Get your ass up to the chopper pad, bring anyone else you can find too, and whatever you do, don't touch this stuff all over the bearer.
I can't get back out. There's a safety door, the railings are all gone.
For God's sake, do I have to tell you how to do everything? Give the door a tidy kick at the bottom. It'll open right enough.
As fantastic a character as he is, he's never really in any control, his destiny decided by those around him. Thematically, it is consistent. Remember, he's in the middle of the North Sea, not because he actually wants to be there, but because it's a way of solving a problem. However, with Still Wakes the Deep's gameplay also so railroaded, it's sometimes hard to shake the feeling you're being kept on a very short leash. More on that later. As you likely already suspect, along with the continued series of oil rig-based calamities Kaz has to overcome, there's also the various beasts roaming its halls to contend with. Details surrounding the mysterious outbreak are kept deliberately vague, with most intrigue again provided via the characters who have succumbed to a very inhuman fate.
No, no, no! Help me!
Christ almighty.
Whether enough information about this side of the story is divulged will be down to personal preference. What can be said for certain is that by the time the credits roll, you'll probably have just as many questions as you have answers. The other side of the story concerns Kaz and his family, as well as his behaviour prior to him heading to Bearer D. He is a man in the midst of dealing with metaphorical demons as well as more literal ones, and the regular injections of family drama are a sensible way of expanding his character without resorting to an overly lengthy, exposition-filled introduction. Without delving into spoiler territory, it's an interesting enough yarn, with reveals provided right the way through till Still Wakes the Deep's climax, but like the Christmas carnage which develops at sea, it lacks bite.
When are you leaving?
Tomorrow morning.
You are shitting me, McCreary. It's the girls' school concert.
I'm fucking scunnered, Suze. What do you want from me?
I'm just saying this, Kaz. If you leave us, if you run, if you go, then we are done. You hear me?
The glaring issue is that the closer you get to the game's finale, the stronger your assumption will become that a big reveal is at hand, one which will bring together Kaz's present predicament and his problematic past. Unfortunately, however, that never happens, with the two never combining in any meaningful way. A conclusion left open to interpretation may be of value to some, but with so much leading up to that moment already shrouded in mystery, forming any attachment to a story which lacks the requisite depth is a tricky task indeed. The Chinese Room does deserve a lot of credit for crafting an incredible stage upon which the story unfolds. Bearer D and the workers who inhabit her juxtapose each other superbly. A creaking, groaning structure on its last legs, she is nevertheless still teeming with life, although that obviously isn't the case for very long. Before the drilling incident, workers' chatter and the clanking industrial noises of them doing their jobs fills the air, as does the calming sounds of the sea. After disaster strikes, it's the same story, except everything is markedly more threatening. Monsters' voices become a staple, their movement across the rig emphasised by all manner of bangs and crashes, and the sea becomes an ever more violent entity, its waves crashing against the rig. Day eventually becomes night as any hope of a happy ending hangs in the balance. Still Wakes the Deep atmosphere and aesthetic, a perfect match for the emotions it works so hard to evoke. The best video game settings add as much colour to their world as the characters within them, and Still Wakes the Deeps is one of the better examples seen in recent years. That idea extends to music too. Jason Graves's brilliant soundtrack incorporates elements of Gaelic music, which gives proceedings a heartfelt but unsettling tone, and it also takes inspiration from Ennio Morricone's phenomenal work on The Thing. Hearing that familiar dum-dum used across multiple tracks will warm most horror fans' souls, especially when it's heard in conjunction with the contorted nightmares of flesh and limb you must avoid at regular intervals.
Jesus.
Like the characters and conversations, it's again a great pity that such confident work is ultimately undermined by a story that never comes together in convincing fashion. If that overarching narrative had been of sufficient quality to stand alongside the characters and audio-visual work, the result would have been an arresting masterpiece. Perhaps then it Still Wakes the Deep's gameplay which provides the pièce de résistance. After all, it sounds like a big improvement on paper. When compared to the Chinese Room's previous endeavours, Dear Esther, Amnesia, A Machine for Pigs, and Everybody's Gone to the Rapture especially, it is by far the most interactive of them all. A criticism often aimed at the aforementioned titles is that they feature so little in the way of gameplay mechanics that they could barely even be described as video games. On the whole, that's an incorrect assertion whichever way you slice it, but there is an element of truth in certain cases. With its horror stylings, A Machine for Pigs is the obvious point of comparison. Compared to its predecessor, Amnesia: The Dark Descent, which required a good amount of mechanical engagement, the majority of Pigs tasks you with walking forwards, and that's about it. There are one or two moments of trepidation where it is possible to pop your clogs, but as long as your brain cells are in the double digits, they are not troubling. Its story, on the other hand, is fascinating and arguably better than The Dark Descent's, with an excellent script and solid voice work, and its Victorian London setting is handled impeccably. It sounds like just about the perfect foundation to build on with Still Wakes the Deep. Keep the horror stylings and the terrific writing, retain A Machine for Pigs' gloomy atmosphere, but make the experience as a whole more mechanically engaging. In fairness, that seems to be exactly what the Chinese Room has set out to do for the most part, and it creates a fascinating clash between old and new. Whether you're a fan of the genre or not, Walking Simulator's time in the sun passed a while ago, and a horror game which barely asks anything of its audience was always going to be a tough sell these days. Consequently, adding the additional mechanics found within Still Wakes the Deep makes total sense. Yes, a lot of your time is still spent walking or very awkwardly sprinting through extremely linear environments, but there's now mild platforming, mild being the operative word. There are 2 or 3 points you have to sneak past the horrors hunting you, and there is one puzzle to solve which takes all of 30 seconds to figure out. Along with them comes the usual tasks you have to repeat way too many times, turning valves, extinguishing fires, and pulling levers to clear paths that are never more than 3 feet away, and you also have to use heaters to warm yourself up, a bizarre mechanic of zero substance which might as well not be included, such is its pointlessness.
God, stop. Shake. Fuck. Stop thinking about it. Just stop thinking about it. Jesus. Right.
You also spend considerable time swimming too, which is desperately unintuitive. Completing this laundry list of unengaging activities generally requires zero thought at least, as every direction you need to head in, every part of the world you need to interact with, every hiding spot which will keep you safe from nearby terrors, is bright yellow. Given the recent debate surrounding the use of the colour to guide gamers, the release of this monument to yellow paint, the most obvious signposting known to man, is hilarious in its timing. It removes all the tension which might have otherwise arisen. With these gameplay elements being so formulaic, so immersion-breaking, the big question is whether they should have been added at all, and the answer is no. They may add a level of interactivity previously unseen in the developer's works, but even if they're a step up, they cannot be looked at in isolation and must be compared to other contemporary video games outside Still Wakes the Deep. Unfortunately, when looked at from that perspective, they do not compare altogether favourably. It's a bitter pill to swallow, as the Chinese Room's ambition to go above and beyond their previous efforts is plain for all to see. That being said, when the mechanics you've introduced actively distract from the game's beating heart, in this case the characters, their interactions, and the atmosphere, you may end up with the impression that their removal would actually be a positive. Surprisingly, for a title filled with malformed monstrosities, familial drama, and constant dread, Still Wakes the Deep ends up being an experience which lacks a killer instinct. Throughout its ups and downs, it's hard to escape the feeling that it could have been so much more. How much you personally get out of its short runtime is ultimately going to depend on what you value most. If well-written dialogue which effortlessly transitions between comedic and heart-wrenching is your thing, there's a lot to love, and that remains the case if you're looking for a winning combination of setting and atmosphere. If a strong gameplay proposition and a story which sticks the landing are your main concerns, however, it's likely you'll end up disappointed. Still Wakes the Deep isn't a must-play, nor is it a title to be avoided at all costs. To describe it as either would be well wide of the mark. Instead, like the watery expanse it takes place directly above, it can be spectacular, but unfortunately, it's also nowhere near as deep. Thanks for watching the video, boys, girls, and oil rig workers. If you had a frighteningly good time, do consider liking, subscribing, and sharing your thoughts regarding Still Wakes the Deep. And all's well, we'll catch up again soon.